Hi, my friends. How are you today? My name is Misty Sims, and if you found me, you have found my little corner of the internet that I like to call Beyond Reasonable Doubt, where we talk all things true crime, culty, and a little creepy. If you're new here, thank you so much for clicking this video link, and I would love if you would click that subscribe button and the notification bell so I can bring you more true crime all the time. And if you're a returning subscriber, you already know that I love you more than cupcakes with sprinkles. We're bearing the colds and snow here in Tennessee, which is not typical. It's typical of January, but not at sub-zero wind chills and 8 to 10 inches of snow. So it's crazy for us to see this much, but it's been so beautiful, and we've really enjoyed getting to play in it and eating our weight in snow cream. So I hope wherever you are staying warm and snuggly. And today's case is going to be one for you to grab a snack or a drink and your fuzzy socks, because we're probably going to be here for a little bit because it is a doozy. So on a cold Texas winter Saturday in January of 2003, attorney Neil Davis found himself walking into a Houston police station. He recently joined a new law firm and had been called to go see a client's daughter in Houston. And the scene he found himself walking in and looking at was not typical of a relaxing weekend. After taking a look around the small, unassuming home, he went to the police station and wrote an address on the back of a business card and told the police they needed to investigate. A teary-eyed woman answered the door and led them into the backyard that looked pretty normal and unassuming until they saw a disturbed plot of land with an arm protruding from the fresh dirt. It was at this point everyone realized that this was not normal, and they had quite a situation on their hands. This is the controversial case of Susan Wright, aka the Blue-Eyed Butcher, and it's going to leave you angry, confused, and everything in between. So let's dive right on in. Jeffrey Wright was born on March 1st, 1968 in Kenosha, Wisconsin to parents Kate and Ronald White, along with one sister and a brother. His friends would describe him as having a big personality and as a pretty big partier, using substances and going on for days and at a time without sleep. And he was also known to sell substances and got arrested in 1996 for trying to smuggle a large amount of Mary J into the U.S. He was held in a jail in Mexico until his girlfriend at the time drove to the border and paid his $2,500 bail. In 1997, while hanging out at a beach in Galveston, Jeff would meet Susan, and his life would change forever. Susan was 20 years old at the time and worked as a waitress in Houston, and she and her friends had decided to take a little vacation to the beach. Jeff was 29 and selling flooring, and after a few years of partying, it almost caught his friend Paul off guard when Jeff told him that Susan was special and he was going to marry her. Susan Wright was born on April 24th, 1976, to parents Sue and Jimmy. She had a twin brother and one older sister. They were upper middle class, and she grew up in an area very close to Houston and never really left the Houston area. Her mother was described as a stay-at-home mom who had a knack for baking, while her father provided the family with a very nice income and means of living through his job as a mechanical engineer. But Jimmy was said to have a real bad temper. Susan's sister would claim in later years that her father regularly beat their mom, and they were basically taught that it was acceptable for a man to yell at, beat, and even grape their wives. And they didn't realize at the time that this isn't how everybody lived. She also claimed that her father would hit the children as well, but note that Sue and Jimmy have both denied these claims. Susan's friends would describe her as sensitive, quick to cry, and timid, to the point she even transferred schools when a girl was mean to her. She was an average student, but she had a pretty active social life, never really having an issue with getting dates with boys that she liked. She said she kind of craved the attention of young men in her teens, and she was absolutely beautiful, but she didn't have any self-confidence. And she took people's words very seriously, especially when it came to her appearance, and would try to make immediate like when she got insulted. Like if someone said she was fat, she was immediately on a crash diet. She kind of based her self-worth on other people's words, vice her own opinion. So after high school, she worked some different jobs, including cutting hair while taking some college classes, but surprised everybody when she turned 18 and became a dancer at a gentleman's club in Houston. She was so sheepish and prim and proper that nobody could believe it. But Susan claims she took this job because of a boyfriend at the time encouraging her to do so, and she only danced for 2 months, and then she became a waitress at that club, and then altogether would leave the club after about 2 years and take a more typical waitress job at a restaurant, and that was around the time that she met Jeff Wright. So in the beginning, Jeff showered Susan with attention, calling her multiple times a day, brought her gifts, flowers, really courting her, taking her to fancy places, wining and dining her. And Susan found him charming, and she loved his traditional values. He wanted a stay-at-home wife who was a mother to his kids, and that's what she wanted for a family life. And he wanted to start his own business one day, and Susan loved that he was, an entrepreneur, a go-getter, all those type of things. And she found him super handsome. So he was just a whole package for her. And Jeff thought she was equally beautiful. She was petite, blonde hair, blue eyes. They were just an adorable little match. And Jeff would give credit to Susan, saying that she got him out of that party lifestyle and made him want to settle down and start a family. So their friends thought they had a fantastic relationship based on how they acted around each other. They kind of just seemed dreamy. But in 1998, Susan became pregnant with their first child, and they had to talk about things like abortion. They ultimately decided to keep the baby, although his friends were worried that he might not be ready to parent based on his old lifestyle. But they knew he wanted to marry Susan, and so when she was about 7-8 months pregnant, Jeff gave her an engagement ring while sitting in their car and asked for her hand. So on October 10th, 1998, they got married in a small church ceremony and had their reception at Outback Steakhouse. So it's probably not picture perfect for everybody, but it was all that they could afford. And a couple months later, on November 14th, she gave birth to their son, and around April of 1999, they moved to a very nice subdivision in Northwest Harris County. A couple of years later, Susan would then give birth to their daughter. And Jeff's friends said that he absolutely adored his wife and kids, and Susan's friends described her as somehow managing just to do it all. She was the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and then she also worked part-time at an orthodontist office and wanted to save up to go to nursing school. But it kind of came to light that Jeff was very controlling with the finances, so Susan had to give him her paychecks, and then he would in turn give her a weekly allowance. And that allowance was about $75, and it had to buy groceries for the week and then provide everything for the kids. So in today's terms, that would be around $135, $140, which if y'all know, like prices of groceries, that wouldn't be a lot for a family of four, especially if that baby was still in diapers and formula and using formula and that kind of thing. So anything outside of that allowance being saved for nursing school wasn't really feasible. And on top of all that, money was already tight. Jeff wasn't making quite as much as he had in the past, and he had fallen back into his addiction. Susan would say that he was drinking a lot, smoking Mary J on the regular, and then he was getting into harder substances. And his father Ron would confirm this, but said that Jeff was good at keeping the addiction under control and not letting it affect his job, finances, or marriage. And I feel like that's a slippery slope for someone in active addiction, but those are just the words his daddy used. So, Ron would go on to defend him, saying Jeff made good money. He planned to build them a big house. He was going to purchase Susan a new car. And another friend said that he didn't think they were struggling because they both drove nice vehicles. But that's easy to say when you're on the outside looking in. If you don't see someone's debt, their bills, the bank accounts, you don't really know their struggles, and people don't usually share that outward, even with family. So not disputing dad and the friend, but they just might not have been privy to all the puts and takes of finances. And Susan, around this time in 2003, was said to be growing very unhappy. Their marriage had turned rocky, to the point where she called Jeff's mother on the 13th of January and said that Jeff had come home high and punched their 4-year-old son in the face. And she ended up throwing him out of the house, and he yelled back at her, "F this house, I'm tired of you and the kids." So his mother said that he had called her on the way home, and he seemed fine, not high, but so she's a little perplexed. But Susan went on to tell her best friend Jamie pretty much the same story. Jamie's trying to get her to call the police, but Susan didn't want to do that. She didn't want to pursue a police report. But the next day she did go to the doctor, and she was covered in cuts and bruises that she said she got when Jeff attacked her when she jumped him for punching their son. The doctor urged her to get a restraining order, so she did go to the Harris County Police Station the next day, told them about her drug use, his drug use, then also told about him slamming her into the wall. He had his keys in his hand, and that's what caused all those cuts and scratches. And then Susan told them that he had never come back home. So Deputy Scott Hall believed what Susan was telling him. He photographed her hands, issued an arrest warrant for Jeff. He perceived that she was a victim of DV and afraid. So Friday, January 17th, the police called Susan again, asking if she knew of Jeff's whereabouts, and she said he had not been back home, but she was still very fearful that he would come back and hurt her. And her family said she was becoming very withdrawn, very panicked, saying she was terrified. 4 days go by, but no one's seen him. His parents said he didn't even call on their wedding anniversary, which was unlike him. And of note, his truck never left the driveway. So his dad was concerned, why, if he walked out, why did he not take his truck? Like, why is he just walking, right? So at this point, Susan's story started changing depending on who she was talking to, right? She had told the mother and the friend of the violence against her son. Then she told the doctor Jeff had attacked her too. The doctor was told that Jeff had cut her with the keys during the attack, while she told other people he scratched her with his fingernails. But she always repeated that she was scared that he was going to come back and hurt her. Some people said that he did come back. Apparently there was like a report that he tore up the house when she wasn't there, bleaching her clothes, and then he left again. But he still didn't take his truck, which seems odd, because you think if you're leaving for good, like, you're not going to do so on foot, right? I mean, if you're kind of blitzed out of your mind on a substance, maybe that first time you're not thinking clearly and you just walk out. But after days of returning and you've gone through all that trouble of messing the house up, I think you'd get your truck. But I don't know. Who knows? On January 18th, Susan and her parents were together, and she told them that she felt physically and mentally awful. So somehow the conversation took a right-hand turn, and her mother asked her, had she killed Jeff? Susan just put her head down and then finally admitted Jeff never left their home on Monday. Instead, she had used a knife to stab him and hid his body on the property. She told them that she had done this while the kids were in bed, and Susan told her mom, Mama, it wasn't me. I snapped. I saw somebody in there doing it, but it wasn't me. Her mother immediately called the attorney's office, and Neil Davis would go to the police, give them the address of her home, and on the back of that business card we talked about, and the police would arrive, and quickly Detective Reynolds, who was a seasoned vet with hundreds of homicides under his belt, would say none he had ever investigated were quite like this one. There was a shallow hole that Jeff had been digging to put a water fountain in on their property, and this is where investigators would find Jeff partially buried. He was face down, but the back of his head, his left shoulder, and arm were exposed. He wasn't clothed, and he had neckties around his wrists and a belt of a bathrobe around one of his ankles. Officers also saw some candle wax melted on the inner thigh and private region, and the investigators thought that he had maybe been totally concealed at one time, but an animal, possibly the family dog, had dug him up and even eaten a portion of his hands. Inside the master bedroom, all over the walls and carpet and other places, there was blood. Carpet and portions of the carpet had been cut out and bleached. There were paint cans, scissors, box cutters on the floor. One wall looked like it had been attempted to be painted to hide blood splatter. There was receipts for bleach, bleach-stained women's jeans on the floor, and a towel. And the bed was broken down. All that was in the house from the bed that had been there was footboard and rails. The police would later find the mattress, box springs, and headboard in the backyard, and that mattress was soaked in Jeff's blood. They also found a knife in the yard that was missing a tip that had been broken off, and it was too long before they found it in Jeff's skull. And then they also saw 10 bags of topsoil in the back of Jeff's pickup. Assistant Harris County Medical Examiner Dr. Dwayne Wolf performed the autopsy and believed Jeff had been stabbed approximately 193 times. 41 wounds to the face, 23 to the neck, 46 to the chest, 22 to the abdomen, 7 to his pelvic area, 19 to his legs, 23 to his arms and hands, and 1 on his back. And the wounds themselves weren't deep enough to cause his death, but the combination of all those wounds led to him passing away. The doctor also said that it could have been more than 193, but the condition that his body was in, due to all those wounds, made it almost impossible to keep counting and differentiating. The toxicology report would show Jeff had alcohol, cocaine, and GHB in his system. Now, the latter is known as a date rape drug, but it can be a downer or sedative, or it can give a person a feeling of euphoria, according to the Better Health Network. So, long story short, Susan had been lying the whole time about Jeff leaving and walking out. Susan voluntarily checked into a psychiatric hospital on January 18th while police were still combing through the scene at the couple's home. One of the doctors, Jerome Brown, was told by Susan that Jeff had abused her physically and emotionally for years, and she couldn't go on like this anymore. Their marriage was a complete sham. Soon after their son was born, Jeff changed. He was controlling and demanding. He wanted perfection from her at all times, including keeping the newborn absolutely quiet. If anything didn't go as he wanted, Jeff would be furious with Susan. But she said in the beginning it was just simply him being angry. Susan said he would often call her names, especially after her pregnancy weight gain. And she also claimed to be diagnosed with postpartum depression, and Jeff wouldn't allow her to take the medication that she had been given, simply saying she needed to suck it up and do her job. Susan said she tried to talk to him and get him to understand how this behavior was affecting her, but that's when the physical abuse began. And her own sister claims that she did see bruises and a black eye, and Susan always would claim that they were accidents and just kept up the perfect marriage facade. But her sister likened this to their childhood and what Susan had been accustomed to. At one point, Susan told her sister that he had thrown her through a wall, and her sister said that she saw a human-sized hole in the wall. She got her out of the home along with the young son, but after talking to Jeff and what Susan claims were threatening conversations, she returned back to the home. She also claims to have miscarried in December of 2000 due to him kicking her in the stomach, and then she wasn't allowed to seek medical care. After her daughter was born the following year, she suffered from postpartum depression again and was met with the same lack of empathy from Jeff, and he even went on to begin numerous affairs with other women. And Susan said he told her that he needed the other women because she wasn't good enough, and even claims that he gave her an STD due to his numerous extramarital partners and escapades. Susan shared that Jeff had a cocaine problem and Mary J, and with her sister, she kept telling her these things, and said these episodes of him using was when she was most likely to be attacked. Any violation of his standards, stress from money or job, Susan would suffer the consequences, but she still never really told anybody the truth out of fear, and she felt like it was her fault. When asked why she didn't divorce him, she said that he said he would end her life if she did, and Susan believed him. By that winter, Susan claims he was drunk all the time. He was not allowing her to leave the home for more than 90 minutes, and the locations were only to the grocery store and to her mother's house. So on New Year's Day 2003, she claims he got up and told her that this year would be her last. And 2 weeks later, Jeff would be the one whose life was ended. So on January 23rd, Susan would be arrested and charged with first-degree murder and held without bond. Jeff's family and friends feel like Susan was lying about the whole thing of the abuse. Jeff's father said he never saw any symptoms of Susan being an abused woman. And of course, her family and friends are saying that they saw the bruises and such, that it had all been visible. And Susan gave her account of what happened on that fateful January day. She said Jeff came home from his boxing lessons and his eyes were bloodshot and glassy, and said he tried to roughhouse with their 4-year-old son and wanted to box with him. When the little boy got bored and didn't want to do it anymore, Jeff got angry and punched him in the face so hard it knocked the kid backward into a piece of furniture. Then he called the little boy a sissy and went to take a shower. When he re-entered the master bedroom wearing only a towel from the shower, she was waiting to confront him. She said that he had to get professional help for the drugs and the anger or she was going to leave. Jeff became enraged, threw her on the bed, and started kicking her and ultimately raping her. Susan said she kept her eyes tightly closed during the assault, and when he was done, she felt him move and heard him say, "Die, B," and he was holding the knife. She struggled with him, was cut in the process, kneed him in the groin, and was able to grab the knife and push him off of her, and she was in such fear of her life, so she attacked and claimed she suffered a break in reality and didn't even understand Jeff was actually dead and knew that he was going to wake up and attack her again, so she just kept stabbing and going, even getting on top of him as he had her during the assault, all the time stabbing. She just said she couldn't stop, and the only thing that finally did stop her for a moment was her 4-year-old knocking on the door, interrupting the attack. And then once she put him to bed, she came back and had started the attack all over again with a now newly retrieved knife from the kitchen, which she claims she went to get because she was worried he had woken up, had managed to untie himself, or she had tied him to the bed thinking he was going to get up. And when she approached in the room and found him still on the bed, she started stabbing him again. Finally, she stopped, and she didn't want to seek help from her friends or family, so she claims at this point she would to be in a PTSD type fog. She was just doing things, didn't really understand them, didn't know what was going on around her. So she says she hid the body due to being in this fog, and she didn't think of it as covering up a crime, but rather than getting him out of the house because she felt like he was going to wake up and then he couldn't find her if he was outside. Now, she found him too heavy when she was trying to drag him, and even ended up knocking a candle over in the process, which is how the wax got on him. So she tied him to a furniture dolly, like movers use, with the neckties and the belt of a bathrobe, and was able to move him to the backyard where she put him in that pre-dug hole. And after that, she says she sat on the couch for the entire night, watching in the backyard, just waiting on him to come back and hurt her. When, of course, he didn't, the lies had to start, right? And then she started painting parts of the bedroom walls. She drug the mattress outside. She's bleaching the carpet, cutting out the bloody portion. And she claims none of this was a cover-up. She claims this was part of the fog, and she was trying to clean up the mess because she knew when he did come home, he was going to be angry. And then she went to the doctor and went to the police about a restraining order. But the odd thing was she re-recorded an answering machine message and removed Jeff's name, well, I'll get that out in a minute, from the greetings that the callers would receive. So a lot of people found that odd, even if it was a fog getting the best of her. She also hadn't sought treatment or protection before under any of the claimed incidents, but decided to do that in the midst of the fog. And then, of course, removing him from answering machine, coupled with now going for all this help, seemed a little weird in the fog. And Dr. Brown at the mental hospital that Susan was in did believe that she was indeed in a dissociated from reality state. She was responding to his questions with no eye contact, a lot of dreaminess. She was constantly crying and sighing. And then she was overly obsessive and paranoid that Jeff was in the hallways and wandering around. So Dr. Brown diagnosed her with PTSD and depression and said that the fog was basically her mind's way to disconnect from the harm. He believed that she had a mental break and remained that way for quite some time, drifting in and out of reality. And many DV experts agree that victims can have a dissociative state and can't remember some traumatic events very clearly. So in their opinions, it is very possible to experience this type of break. Well, Susan's case was going to gain a massive amount of media attention because, she's this petite, blonde, pretty mother of two, standing with an admission of this brutal crime. And mainly it was the state of mind that she was in being questioned. So the news dubbed her the blue-eyed butcher. And people were shocked, and they piled into the courtroom when her trial began in early 2004, leaving only standing room. And her attorney, Neil Davis, was very inexperienced. He had never defended a murder case involving DV, and his co-counsel had never defended a murder case, period. And the prosecutor, Kelly Siegler, was seasoned. And she was no match for these two young attorneys. She was described as the fiercest prosecutor in Houston. She would stand within inches of her defendants and when addressing them, and it was called being, known for being pushy. And she was known for using props and theatrics to communicate her point to jurors. She gained so much attention that TV called, and she appeared on an Oxygen show called Cold Justice. But this case right here with Susan Wright is what skyrocketed her to fame across the country. She created an environment to show the jury what Jeff felt and discredited Susan and the abuse claims. During opening statements, Kelly explained that Susan wanted to take Jeff's life rather than to divorce him so that she could gain access to a recent life insurance policy he had taken out. Ms. Siegler claimed that Susan seduced him, tied him up to engage in a BDSM-style sex act, and also render him defenseless. She would go on to tell the jury that she was setting the mood and flirting and dripped that candle wax on him as part of this seduction. And then, when the opportunity was right, she attacked, killed him, buried him, and then started the lying. She also emptied one of their joint bank accounts, and Siegler said that the only reason the plan fell apart was because the family dog dug him up. Now, this wasn't true since Susan had confessed, but hear her out, right? Siegler called Detective Reynolds to the stand, and he did testify that he believed that Jeff was tied when the attack began because Jeff didn't have wounds typical of a victim who was trying to move away from their attacker. So it did lead them to believe that he was completely restrained and couldn't get away. He admitted that he didn't believe a small woman of her stature could have wrestled a weapon away from an enraged Jeff, who was 6'2", and he weighed over 100 pounds more than her. As a demonstration, the mattress and wood from the bed headboard were brought into the courtroom and set up as the bed would have been in the Wright's home. And you could still see blood on the mattress, so it was a lot. Siegler tied up one of her male colleagues to the bed using the neckties and a bathrobe belt, just like were on Jeff. And when she showed that she was close to Susan's size and the colleague was close to Jeff's size, she climbed onto the colleague, straddling him, and held a knife while she was asking the detective clarifying questions and would demonstrate the stabbing as the detective would say things. Now, the defense attorney tried to keep overruling this and objecting and all these things, or objecting, and then the judge would overrule it because Siegler was like mime stabbing him while asking questions by actually acting out the scene. She didn't reenact all 193 wounds nor the seduction, but it was a production nonetheless. Hollywood actually called to make a TV movie about her, and People magazine covered her antics, so it was a show. And Siegler made sure, beyond this, that she was clear that Susan wasn't this perfect Christian wife that she pretended to be and not boring in the intimate parts of their marriage. She pointed out that she had been a dancer in the gentleman's club and that they found handcuffs in her nightstand, which is a little crass, but okay. Neil Davis did his best to recover and defend Susan on the abuse claims, but didn't put an expert on the stand. Rather, he just asked the jury over and over during like his opening and closing statements, you know, did they not understand what battered wife syndrome was, and da-da-da-da-da. And, I mean, had he put Dr. Brown on the stand, he would have had to say that when she checked into the hospital, her initial statement was that she killed Jeff in her sleep, and that was later retracted to the whole confession story. But even though he would have harmed it, he could have still put up other DV experts who would have testified, you know, on her behalf. Or he could have put up the ex-girlfriend that bailed Jeff out of jail in Mexico. Remember her? She actually reached out when she saw the case on the media and said that when he was drinking, he was mean and he was abusive. He had thrown her down the staircase. And Jeff had even been arrested for assaulting her. But due to communication issues, somehow Attorney Davis didn't get her on that stand during the trial. And this ex-girlfriend was actually Misty McMichael, who's married to Steve McMichael, former NFL and collegiate football player, and was actually a professional wrestler just before marrying Misty, which is how I sort of got led down into this case, and it piqued my interest. Y'all know all roads lead back to wrestling for me. But Misty wasn't a hostile witness. I mean, she would have carried a little bit of pizzazz, you know, being that she was married to Steve. So this would have been a great witness for the defense. Sorry if you can hear my kids in the background, but it's a cabin fever. But we'll never know because he didn't put her on the stand. Why? By the end of the trial, the jury they were conflicted, and they were facing a her word against his word, but he couldn't give his word, right? So after 5 hours of deliberation, 27-year-old Susan was found guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 25 years. The jury felt it was an issue that there was no evidence of abuse outside of just family and friends saying so. Susan had Brian Wise, who saw the whole trial, take her up on her appeal and got her sentence to reduce down to 20 years. And in January 2021, Susan was released from prison after 16 years and will remain on parole until this year in 2024. She had to wear an ankle monitor, attend anger management, and had to remain in Texas. Now, her kids are adults now, and they were raised by Jeff's parents, and she had lost all parental rights. So, super sad. Ooh, so what do I think? So I don't think it was carried out as she said. I think she did think it out prior, especially with that GHB being in the system. Not to say he wouldn't do that, but it just seems conducive with wanting to seduce him and quiet him down. I do think she was being abused after people saw those bruises and after Misty McMichael's account. I know anyone experiencing abuse can be afraid to get out. I believe people can only be pushed so far. And it breaks my heart that anyone would be fearful enough to leave, that this would be what they felt like was the only answer. It kind of feels like the reverse ending of the last case that we covered. But it's gut-wrenching, you know? I mean, here we don't have a dead victim like Ashley Scott, but we've got a dead abuser, so like it's just death, and it's just unfortunate. But as I said in the last video, if you're in danger from your partner, and this is not limited to women, let me be very clear, it can easily be men too, but if you're fearful, please use a resource, a friend, law enforcement, something, and get out. We don't want to lose you to violence or into the system. We don't want to lose anybody else at this point. Well, that was a big one. That was heavy. That's all from me today, guys. But as always, I want you to stay safe out there and stay sweet, my cupcakes, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!